Every woman deserves to be seen as beautiful by someone who truly matters. Sometimes it takes traveling across an ocean to find that one person who sees your worth when the whole world has turned away. In ancient Norway, Brynhild steps off a trading ship as a mail-order bride. She's been rejected before for being too large, but this time feels different. When her intended husband takes one look and refuses the match, the village laughs and points. But Viking warrior Varg Stoneskin watches, quietly from the crowd. While others see flaws, he sees strength. While they mock, he remembers what real beauty looks like. When he steps forward and declares, "She's perfect," everything changes. What happens when someone finally sees you the way you've always hoped? To be seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salt spray had long since dried on Brynhild's weathered cloak, but she could still taste the brine on her lips as she stood on the wooden dock of Ravensfjord. 3 weeks at sea had given her ample time to rehearse this moment, yet now that it had arrived, every practiced word abandoned her like gulls fleeing a storm. Her trunk sat beside her feet, oak planks bound with iron, containing everything she owned in this world. The wedding dress, folded carefully within, had taken her 6 months to complete, each stitch sewn by candlelight after long days in her stepfather's kitchen. The cream-colored wool had cost her nearly a season's wages, but she'd believed then that looking her best might make the difference between acceptance and rejection. Now, watching the villagers gather on the shore with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disgust, she wondered if any amount of fine cloth could overcome what they saw when they looked at her. Brynhild had always been large. Even as a child in the green hills of her homeland, she towered over other girls her age. Her frame broad, where theirs was delicate, her appetite healthy, where theirs was modest. Her mother had died birthing her, and her stepfather never let her forget that she'd emerged into the world, taking up too much space from the very beginning. Like a draft horse in a stable of ponies, he'd mutter when she knocked over something with her elbow or split the seams of yet another dress. The comparison stung, not because it was cruel, but because she'd come to believe it might be true. Siu, marriage broker, had been kind enough, she supposed. Magnus Eriksson dealt in practical arrangements, men who needed wives, women who needed homes, coins changing hands to make both problems disappear. When he'd approached her stepfather about the arrangement in Ravensfjord, he'd been honest about the challenges. The man lost his wife 2 winters past, Magnus had explained, counting silver into her stepfather's palm. He's not looking for beauty or youth. He needs someone strong enough to work, quiet enough not to complain, and grateful enough not to run. His eyes had assessed her like livestock. She'll do. The journey north had been a mixture of terror and hope. Terror that she was sailing toward yet another rejection, another man who would take one look and decide she wasn't worth the trouble. Hope that perhaps, in the harsh wilderness of the Norse territories, strength might matter more than size, character more than appearance. Varg Stoneskin stood 40 paces away, partially hidden behind a stack of fishing nets, watching the scene unfold with the patience of a man who'd learned to observe before acting. At 43, he carried the marks of 2 decades spent raiding and warring. A scar along his left temple, where a Saxon blade had kissed him, knuckles permanently swollen from breaking against shields and skulls. A slight hitch in his left shoulder, where an arrow had found its mark during the siege of York. But the deepest wounds weren't visible to casual observers. Those lived in the space where his wife Sigrid's laughter used to echo through their longhouse, in the cold side of the bed where her warmth had once chased away winter's bite, in the terrible silence that had settled over his life like snow, that never melted. Sigrid had been everything the village considered beautiful, petite and fair, with hair like spun gold and a voice that could gentle the fiercest warrior. She died trying to birth their 3rd child, taking their unborn son with her into the darkness. Their 2 daughters, Astrid and Ingrid, now 14 and 12, had inherited their mother's beauty, but none of her gentle nature. They'd grown, wild in their grief, and Varg knew his own sorrow had failed them as much as their mother's death. The village elders had been pressuring him to remarry for months. The girls need a mother's guidance, they'd say. You need sons to carry your name. A house without a woman's touch grows cold and bitter. All true enough, but Varg had resisted. The thought of replacing Sigrid felt like betrayal, and every woman the matchmaker suggested seemed like a pale shadow of what he'd lost. Then, Magnus Eriksson had arrived with a different proposal. I have a woman from the Southern Territories, he'd said over ale in Varg's hall. She's not what you'd call beautiful, but she's strong, practical, and grateful for a chance. No romantic expectations, no complications, just someone to keep your house and raise your girls. Varg had agreed without even asking for a description. Perhaps that had been cowardice, letting fate decide rather than making a choice that might dishonor Sigrid's memory. Now, watching the woman on the dock, he felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Brynhild stood with her chin raised despite the whispers surrounding her, her hands steady as the village women pointed and giggled behind their palms. She was indeed large, broader than most men, taller than many warriors. Her hair was brown rather than gold, her face pleasant but unremarkable by conventional standards. But there was something in her bearing, a dignity that reminded him not of Sigrid's delicate beauty, but of his own mother. Brynhild Stoneskin had been a force of nature, tall, strong, and utterly uncompromising. She'd raised 4 sons through 3 brutal winters when the crops failed, buried 2 husbands lost to war, and commanded respect through sheer competence and character. Varg's father used to say that Ragnhild was beautiful, the way mountains were beautiful, not pretty or delicate, but powerful and enduring. Looking at Brynhild now, he saw echoes of that same strength. Bjorn the blacksmith pushed through the crowd, his face red with ale and indignation. As Magnus's local contact, he'd been responsible for evaluating the merchandise before final payment was made. His assessment was swift and brutal. "This is what you brought me?" he bellowed, circling Brynhild like a buyer examining a horse. "I asked for a wife, not a siege engine." The crowd erupted in laughter, and Varg saw Brynhild's shoulders tense, though her expression remained carefully neutral. "She's too big, too plain, and too old," Bjorn continued, warming to his audience. "What use is a woman who'd eat me out of house and home? I need a wife, not a drinking companion for my ox." More laughter rippled through the gathering. Children began to point and giggle, their mothers making no effort to quiet them. Brynhild's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them folded before her, maintaining her composure with visible effort. "The arrangement is void," Bjorn declared with theatrical finality. "Take her back where you found her, trader. I'll not waste good silver on damaged goods." The words hung in the cold air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Varg watched Brynhild's face carefully, seeing the moment when her careful composure began to crack. Not with tears, she was too proud for that, too accustomed to disappointment. Instead, her shoulders sagged slightly, as if she were folding inward, preparing to become smaller, less noticeable, easier to dismiss. It was that gesture, that instinctive attempt to minimize herself in the face of cruelty, that decided him. Varg stepped forward, his movement causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. Even after 2 years of relative peace, his reputation preceded him. The villagers had seen him return from raids with blood in his beard and gold in his hands. They'd watched him crush skulls with his bare fists when berserker rage took him. They'd learned to give him space when his grief made him dangerous. Now they watched him approach the rejected bride with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. He stopped 3 paces from Brynhild, close enough to see the flecks of green in her brown eyes, far enough to avoid crowding her. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent dock. "She's perfect." The words settled over the crowd like the first snowfall of winter, unexpected, transformative, changing the entire landscape in an instant. Bjorn's mouth fell open. Magnus blinked in confusion. The village women stopped whispering and started staring. Even the children went quiet, sensing that something significant had just shifted in their small world. Brynhild looked up at him with an expression of such vulnerable hope that Varg felt his chest tighten. Here was a woman who travelled across dangerous seas on nothing more than the promise of acceptance, only to face public humiliation with grace and dignity. She hadn't begged or wept or raged. She'd simply stood there and taken it, preparing to leave with whatever scraps of pride she could salvage. That took a kind of courage Varg recognized and respected. "I'll take the arrangement," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Name your price, trader. This woman comes home with me." The silence stretched like a bowstring drawn too tight, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Magnus Eriksson's weathered face cycled through confusion, calculation, and finally shrewd understanding. A sale was a sale, regardless of the buyer. "Varg Stoneskin wishes to purchase the arrangement?" Magnus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Years of brokering marriages had taught him when to press and when to simply facilitate. "The terms remain the same. 20 silver pieces, plus compensation for the woman's passage." Bjorn sputtered, like wet kindling trying to catch fire. "You can't be serious. This is my arrangement, my contract." "Was your arrangement," Varg corrected, his tone carrying the kind of quiet authority that had once commanded raids across the North Sea. "You declared it void. The woman is free to accept a new offer." All eyes turned to Brynhild, who stood frozen between disbelief and desperate hope. In her 28 years, no man had ever called her perfect. Most barely acknowledged her existence beyond what work she could provide. Now this scarred warrior, this legend whose very name made strong men step aside, was offering her what Bjorn had just brutally refused. She began, then stopped, her voice catching. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for drama, for something to break the monotony of their harsh lives. She could feel their expectations pressing against her like a physical weight. "Think carefully, woman," called out Helga, the village's self-appointed moral authority. "Varg Stoneskin's first wife was beautiful as summer sunshine. You'd be living in a dead woman's shadow. And his daughters are wild as wolves," added another voice from the crowd. "No mother's been able to tame them since Sigrid died." "He's probably just being kind," whispered a third woman, loud enough for everyone to hear, "taking pity on damaged goods." Each comment hit Brynhild like stones thrown at a tied animal. She'd endured similar cruelties before, but never so publicly, never with so much at stake. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, knuckles white with the effort of maintaining composure. Varg stepped closer, close enough that his bulk blocked her view of the crowd's eager faces. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears. "They speak of shadows and pity," he said quietly, "but I see strength that's been tested and proven. I see a woman who's traveled dangerous seas on faith alone, who stands with dignity while lesser people mock what they don't understand." His pale blue eyes held hers steadily. "I'm not offering charity, Brynhild of the Southern Lands. I'm offering partnership." The way he said her name, with respect, without the slight sneer she'd grown accustomed to, nearly undid her completely. But it was the word partnership that truly shook her. Not ownership, not servitude, but something approaching equality. "Why?" she whispered, the question barely audible above the wind off the fjord. "Because I remember what real strength looks like," Varg replied. "And because any woman brave enough to sail into the unknown deserves better than what that fool offered." Magnus cleared his throat impatiently. "The tide turns soon. If there's to be a transaction, we should complete it promptly." Brynhild looked past Varg's shoulder at the crowd of faces, some mocking, some curious, all waiting to see if she'd accept this unexpected salvation, or if pride would drive her back to the ship that had brought her. Behind them, the village of Ravensfjord stretched up from the harbour, wooden longhouses with carved dragons' heads, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing between the buildings. It looked like the kind of place where a woman might build a life if she were given the chance. I accept, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I accept your offer, Varg Stoneskin. The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs and delighted whispers. This was better entertainment than they'd expected. A rejected bride claimed by the village's most eligible widower. The story would be retold. Around fires for months to come. Bjorn's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. This is madness. Varg, you're letting grief cloud your judgment. That woman will break your furniture and eat your stores bare before winter's end. My judgment is sound, Varg replied without taking his eyes off Brynhild, and my stores are my own concern. Magnus stepped forward, producing a scroll of parchment from his travelling pack. The marriage contract, then. Standard terms. The woman provides domestic service, bears children if the gods will it, and receives protection and provision in return. Witnessed and binding. As Magnus spread the document on a nearby crate and dipped his quill in ink, Varg moved to Brynhild's side. She could feel the warmth radiating from his large frame, could smell the scent of wool and leather and something else, pine smoke and iron, the smell of a man who worked with his hands and lived close to the elements. Are you certain? She asked quietly, aware that she was giving him one last chance to reconsider, to save them both from what might prove a terrible mistake. I'm certain, he replied, accepting the quill from Magnus. Are you? Brynhild looked at the contract, at the careful script that would bind her life to this stranger's, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that had brought her across the sea, but something stronger, more grounded. This man had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen her anyway. He'd stepped forward when others stepped back. I'm certain, she said, and took the quill. Her signature was careful and precise, the letters formed with the same attention to detail she brought to her needlework. Varg's was bolder, more confident, the mark of a man accustomed to making decisions and living with their consequences. Witnessed and sealed, Magnus declared, sprinkling sand across the wet ink. May the gods bless this union with prosperity and peace. The formalities complete, an awkward silence settled over the dock. Traditionally, there would be a feast, a celebration, some acknowledgement of the new bond. But this had been too sudden, too unexpected for such preparations. Come, Varg said simply, lifting Brynhild's trunk as easily as if it were filled with feathers. Let me show you home. As they walked up from the harbour, the crowd gradually dispersed, though Brynhild could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways. Children ran alongside them for a few paces before their mothers called them back. Dogs barked and chickens scattered as they passed through the village centre. Varg's longhouse sat on a slight rise overlooking the fjord, larger than most of the surrounding buildings. The carved wooden posts supporting the roof were decorated with intricate knotwork, and smoke rose steadily from the central fire pit. It looked solid, permanent, like a place where generations might live and grow. But as they approached the heavy wooden door, Brynhild heard voices from within, young, female, and distinctly hostile. I don't care what father says, came a sharp voice. I won't call some fat cow mother. Mama was beautiful and kind and perfect. This woman is nothing like her. Astrid's right, replied a younger voice. Father's lost his mind. We should run away before she gets here. Varg's jaw tightened, but he didn't comment. Instead, he pushed open the door and called into the dimly lit interior. Astrid, Ingrid, come meet your new stepmother. The voices fell silent, but no footsteps approached. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed shut. Varg set down Brynhild's trunk and turned to face her, his expression apologetic but determined. They're grieving still, he said quietly. Give them time. Brynhild nodded, though her heart sank. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing the raw hostility in those young voices brought home the magnitude of what she'd undertaken. She wasn't just accepting a husband, she was stepping into a family still wounded by loss, still loyal to a ghost. Time, she agreed, though she wondered if time alone would be enough to bridge the gulf between them. We all need time. As she stepped across the threshold into her new life, Brynhild carried with her the echo of Varg's words. She's perfect, and the fragile hope that perhaps, someday, this house might feel like home. The interior of Varg's longhouse told the story of a family suspended in grief. Brynhild's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through smoke holes in the roof, revealing a space that had once been carefully tended, but now showed signs of neglect. Dishes sat unwashed on the long wooden table. Clothes lay scattered. Across benches and dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight, but it was the cooking pot that drew her attention most. A large iron vessel sitting cold and empty beside the central fire pit. The metal was darkened with age and use, its surface worn smooth by countless meals prepared within its depths. Even empty, it seemed to emanate the memory of warmth, of a woman who had once stirred stews and ladled out portions with practiced ease. Varg noticed her gaze. "Sigrid's pot," he said quietly, the words heavy with unspoken history. "The girls won't let me move it. They say she might need it when she returns." The simple statement revealed volumes about the household's struggle with loss. These children weren't just missing their mother. They were actively refusing to accept her death, clinging to a hope that was both touching and heartbreaking. "They're hiding," Varg continued, setting her trunk beside a wooden chest near the wall, probably in the sleeping alcove behind the tapestry. "They've become skilled at making themselves invisible when they don't want to face something unpleasant." Brynhild walked slowly around the space, taking in the details that would become her daily reality. The longhouse was well built and spacious, with carved posts supporting the peaked roof and sleeping alcoves carved into the walls. Tapestries hung at intervals, their colors faded, but still beautiful. One depicted a great tree, with roots and branches extending beyond the fabric's edges. "Yggdrasil, the world tree. It's a beautiful home," she said honestly. "Your wife had excellent taste." Something in Varg's expression shifted at her words, not pain exactly, but a complicated mixture of gratitude and wariness. "You don't mind living with her memory everywhere?" Brynhild considered the question carefully. She'd learned long ago that honest answers, even difficult ones, served better than pretty lies. "I'd be foolish to mind something that can't be changed. Your wife was part of your life, part of your children's lives. Pretending otherwise would be cruel to all of us." Varg studied her face, perhaps looking for signs of false bravery or hidden resentment. "Most women would want to put their own mark on things, make changes. I'm not most women," Brynhild replied with a slight smile. "I've spent enough years being unwanted to appreciate acceptance when it's offered. If your daughters need their mother's pot to remain untouched, then untouched it shall remain." A soft, shuffling sound came from behind one of the tapestries, followed by urgent whispers. The girls were listening, though they were trying to be discreet about it. "However," Brynhild continued, raising her voice slightly, "I notice there are dishes that need washing and clothes that need mending. I suspect your daughters have been managing these tasks themselves since their mother died." More whispers, slightly less discreet this time. "They try," Varg admitted, "but they're still young and they're grieving," Brynhild finished gently. "Of course they are. But grief doesn't excuse neglecting basic care. They'll make themselves sick living, in disorder." She moved to the pile of unwashed dishes, rolling up her sleeves with practiced efficiency. "I'll start with these. Do you have a well nearby, or should I heat water from the storage barrels?" "There's a spring behind the house," Varg said, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Brynhild, you don't need to start immediately. You've just arrived, you must be tired from the journey." "Work helps me think," she replied, already stacking bowls and cups. "And I suspect your daughters are more likely to emerge if I'm busy doing something useful rather than sitting here, waiting to meet them." It was a calculated risk, this approach. She could have demanded to meet the girls immediately, could have insisted on establishing her authority from the start. But Brynhild had learned patience through years of disappointment. Sometimes the best way to win a battle was to avoid fighting it directly. She spent the next hour washing dishes and tidying the main room, working quietly while Varg tended to his weapons and tools. The domesticity felt strange after weeks of ship travel, but also comforting. She'd always found peace in useful work, in the transformation of disorder into order. Gradually, the whispers from behind the tapestry grew more frequent. Once, she glimpsed a flash of blonde hair at the edge of the fabric. The girls were curious, despite their hostility. A good sign. When the dishes were clean and stacked, Brynhild turned her attention to the scattered clothing. Most pieces were simple work garments, but several were clearly meant for special occasions. Fine. Wool dresses with intricate embroidery, the kind of garments that required careful maintenance. "These are beautiful," she commented, holding up a blue dress decorated with silver thread. "The needlework is exquisite." "Sigrid made those," Varg said softly. "She was skilled with a needle." She was indeed. Brynhild examined the stitching closely, noting the even tension and precise patterns. "Your daughters are fortunate to have such lovely reminders of their mother's talent." This time, the movement behind the tapestry was more pronounced. A face appeared briefly, young, fair, with eyes the same pale blue as Varg's. The older daughter, Astrid, studying this stranger who spoke respectfully of her dead mother. Brynhild pretended not to notice, continuing her work while maintaining a steady stream of gentle commentary. She praised Sigrid's choices in fabric and design, noted clever details in the construction, treated each garment with obvious care and respect. "The hem on this one has come loose," she observed, holding up a green dress. "But it's easily repaired. Would you like me to mend it, or would one of your daughters prefer to do the work themselves?" The question was directed at Varg, but clearly intended for the hidden audience behind the tapestry. For a long moment silence reigned, then a young voice spoke up, barely audible but distinctly defiant. "I can do it myself." "I'm sure you can," Brynhild replied calmly, setting the dress aside. "Mending is important work. It shows respect for both the garment and the person who made it." More whispers, though these sounded less hostile than before. Brynhild continued sorting through the scattered items, making neat piles and assessing what needed attention. When she found a small wooden doll with tangled yarn hair, she set it carefully on the table where it would be easily seen. "Someone should brush this little one's hair," she said conversationally. "Dolls need grooming just like people do." This time the response was immediate. The tapestry was pushed aside, and a girl of perhaps 12 emerged. The younger daughter, Ingrid, she had her father's height and her mother's delicate features, her blonde hair braided but disheveled. "That's my doll," Ingrid said, moving protectively toward the table. "Her name is Freydis." "Freydis is a good strong name," Brynhild replied, not making any move toward the doll. "She looks well loved." Ingrid picked up the doll, cradling it against her chest. "Mama made her for me when I was little." "She's not a baby toy," she added defensively. "Of course not. I still have a blanket my mother made for me, and I'm much older than you. Some things are too precious to outgrow." The girl studied Brynhild's face, perhaps looking for signs of mockery or condescension. Finding none, she relaxed slightly. "Are you really going to stay?" Ingrid asked. "If you'll have me," Brynhild replied honestly. "I know this is hard for you. I'm not trying to replace your mother. No one could do that. But perhaps we can find a way to be family together." Behind the tapestry, Astrid remained hidden, but Brynhild could sense her listening intently to every word. 3 days into her new life, Brynhild discovered the true extent of her challenge when young Thorstein, the blacksmith's son, arrived at their door burning with fever and struggling to breathe. His mother Gudrun clutched him desperately, her face streaked with tears as she begged Varg for help. "Please," she gasped, "I know Sigrid would have known what to do. The boy can't catch his breath, and his skin burns like forge coals. I've tried everything I know, but nothing helps." Varg's expression grew pained. His wife had indeed been the village's primary healer, her knowledge of herbs and remedies saving countless lives over the years. Since her death, the village had struggled with treating anything more serious than minor cuts and bruises. "I'm sorry, Gudrun," he began, "but I don't have Sigrid's knowledge." "I might be able to help," Brynhild interrupted quietly, moving closer to examine the child. Young Thorstein was perhaps 7 years old, his small chest rising and falling in labored gasps while sweat beaded on his flushed face. From her leather pouch, worn smooth from years of use and travel, she withdrew a small collection of dried herbs and roots. The pouch had been her mother's, one of the few things her stepfather hadn't sold or given away. Inside were remedies she'd learned from the village wise woman back home, knowledge that had proven useful when official healers were unavailable or unaffordable, she asked Gudrun, who nodded frantically. Brynhild knelt beside the boy, pressing her ear to his chest and listening carefully to the wet, rattling sounds within. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his lips tinged with blue. She'd seen this before, a lung sickness that could steal a child's life in a matter of days if left untreated. "Varg, I need you to build up the fire and set a large pot of water to boil," she said with quiet authority. "Gudrun, help me get him closer to the hearth." As they worked to move the child, Brynhild's mind catalogued the herbs in her pouch. Willow bark for the fever, colt's foot for the breathing, elderflower to help break the congestion. She'd need to work quickly. The boy's condition was serious. From behind the tapestry, she heard movement. Both Astrid and Ingrid had been watching the drama unfold, and now they emerged fully, their earlier hostility temporarily forgotten in the face of a child's suffering. "Can you really help him?" Ingrid whispered, her eyes wide, with a mixture of hope and fear. "I'm going to try," Brynhild replied honestly, "but I'll need your help. Astrid, you're older. Do you know where your mother kept her healing supplies?" The 14-year-old girl hesitated for a moment, loyalty to her mother's memory warring with the immediate need before them. Finally, she nodded and disappeared into a storage alcove, returning with a wooden box filled with dried herbs, clean cloth, and small clay vessels. "Mama always said the most important thing was keeping the patient calm and comfortable," Astrid said quietly, setting the box beside Brynhild. "Your mother was wise," Brynhild replied, already sorting through the additional supplies, "and you remembered her lessons well. That knowledge might save this boy's life." Working together, they created a tent of blankets around the fire pit and set pots of water infused with healing herbs to steam. The aromatic vapors would help clear Thorstein's lungs, while the willow bark tea brought down his fever. Brynhild showed the girls how to prepare the remedies, explaining each step and the reasoning behind it. "Why do we add honey to the colt's foot tea?" Ingrid asked, stirring the mixture carefully. "Honey soothes the throat and helps the medicine go down easier," Brynhild explained, "but it also has healing properties of its own. Your mother would have known that. It's why she kept several different types in her stores." As the hours passed, Thorstein's breathing gradually improved. The steam tent broke up the congestion in his chest, while the herbal teas reduced his fever and eased his cough. Gudrun wept with relief as her son's color returned to normal and his labored gasps gave way to deeper, easier breaths. "How did you know?" she asked Brynhild, clasping her hands gratefully. "How did you know exactly what he needed?" "I learned from my mother and grandmother," Brynhild replied simply. "Knowledge like this is too precious to keep to oneself. It should be shared, passed down, used to help where it's needed." Word of Thorstein's recovery spread quickly through the village. By evening, other mothers had begun arriving at Varg's door, some with minor ailments that had been troubling them for weeks, others simply wanting to meet the woman who had stepped into Sigrid's role as healer. Brynhild treated each case with the same careful attention she'd given Thorstein. A crying infant with colic received fennel tea and gentle massage. An elderly man's aching joints were helped with a poultice of comfrey and willow bark. A young woman's persistent headaches yielded to a combination of herbs and the suggestion that she might need to eat more regularly. Throughout it all, Astrid and Ingrid assisted, grinding herbs, preparing teas and observing every technique. Brynhild made sure to credit Sigrid's wisdom whenever possible, treating the girls as apprentices rather than servants. "Your mother built something important here," she told them as they cleaned up after the last patient had left. "She created trust, gave people hope when they were suffering. That's a precious legacy. But you're the one healing them now," Astrid said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm using skills your mother would have recognized and approved of," Brynhild corrected, gently. "And I'm learning from the supplies she gathered, the wisdom she left behind. In a way, she's still helping these people through what she built." Varg had watched the entire day unfold with growing amazement. He'd seen Brynhild's gentle competence, her natural authority in matters of healing, the way she'd seamlessly involved his daughters in important work. Most importantly, he'd seen how she honored Sigrid's memory while establishing her own place in the community. That evening, as they sat around the fire sharing their simple meal, the atmosphere in the longhouse felt different. Not happy, exactly, too. Much grief remained for that, but more peaceful, more hopeful. "The villagers will come to depend on you," Varg observed quietly. "Healing is sacred work here. It commands respect. All work has dignity when it serves others," Brynhild replied. "I'm grateful to be useful." Ingrid looked up from her bowl of stew. "Will you teach me more tomorrow? About the herbs and how to help people? If you'd like to learn, I'd be honored to teach you," Brynhild said warmly. "Healing knowledge should never die with one person." Astrid remained silent, but she didn't contradict her sister's interest, and Brynhild caught her studying the herb box with thoughtful eyes. Progress was being made, one careful step at a time. Outside, the wind off the fjord carried the promise of winter. But inside the longhouse, something warmer was beginning to take root. 2 weeks had passed since Brynhild's arrival when the first real test of her place in the household came from an unexpected direction. She was grinding herbs in the afternoon sunlight when raised voices echoed from the village centre, growing louder and more heated by the moment. Through the longhouse doorway, she could see a crowd gathering around the well. At its centre stood Bjorn the blacksmith, his face red with ale and indignation, gesturing wildly as he addressed anyone willing to listen. "Mark my words," his voice carried clearly across the settlement, "that woman will bring nothing but trouble to Varg's house. She's too big, too strange, too different from what we know. The gods favor our own kind, not foreign witches with their mysterious potions." Brynhild's hands stilled on the grinding stone. She'd expected some resistance from the village, but the word witch sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the autumn air. In many places, such accusations could turn deadly, especially when spoken by influential men like Bjorn. "She saved Thorstein's life," protested Gudrun, the boy's mother. "Whatever else you might say about her, she has healing gifts that helped my son when no one else could. Healing or cursing, how can we tell the difference?" Bjorn countered. "Foreign magic often looks helpful at first. That's how it gains a foothold before showing its true nature." Varg had been mending fishing nets outside the longhouse, but now he set down his work and stood slowly. Brynhild recognized the deliberate quality of his movements, the careful control of a man who was choosing whether or not to unleash violence. "Careful with your words, Bjorn," he said, his voice carrying the quiet menace that had once made enemies flee before him. "You speak of my wife." "Your wife?" Bjorn laughed bitterly. "That creature is no proper wife for a man like you, Varg. She's a burden you've foolishly taken on out of misplaced kindness. The whole village knows it." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the promise of confrontation. Brynhild could see faces both sympathetic and hostile, people choosing sides in a conflict that seemed to have been brewing beneath the surface since her arrival. "And what would you know of proper wives?" Varg's voice had dropped to a deadly whisper. "You who drove away the woman I claimed, who showed such cruelty to a stranger seeking only shelter." Astrid and Ingrid had emerged from the longhouse, standing close to Brynhild as they watched their father face down the blacksmith. She could feel their tension, their fear that this confrontation might escalate beyond words. "Father's going to fight him," Ingrid whispered, her small hand creeping into Brynhild's larger one. "Bjorn's been drinking all day, and when he drinks he says stupid things. Then we should make sure your father doesn't have to fight him." Brynhild replied quietly, squeezing the girl's hand reassuringly. "Some battles are better won with wisdom than with fists." She stood, brushing herb dust from her skirts, and walked toward the crowd with measured steps. Conversations faltered as people noticed her approach, uncertainty rippling through a gathering like wind across water. "Bjorn Ironson," she called out clearly, using the formal address that commanded attention. "You speak of foreign magic and mysterious potions. Perhaps you'd like to examine my healing supplies. See for yourself what witchcraft looks like?" The blacksmith turned toward her, swaying slightly on his feet. "Keep your distance, woman. I want nothing to do with your unnatural practices." "Unnatural?" Brynhild smiled, reaching into her herb pouch and withdrawing a familiar plant. "This is willow bark, Bjorn. Have you never chewed it for a headache after too much ale? And this," she produced another specimen, "is chamomile. Perhaps your own mother never brewed it for your stomach troubles as a child." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized the common remedies. Several women nodded knowingly. These were herbs they'd used themselves, plants that grew wild in their own valleys. "The knowledge I carry came from women just like your mothers and grandmothers," Brynhild continued, her voice carrying clearly to every ear, "passed down through generations of healers who understood that helping others is sacred work, not witchcraft." "Words," Bjorn spat. "Pretty words, too. Hide ugly truth. You're too different, too large." Brynhild finished calmly. "Too plain, too foreign? Yes, I've heard these criticisms before, but tell me, Bjorn, when your son was burning with fever, did my size matter to Gudrun? When old Eric's joints were aching so badly he couldn't work? His forge? Did my appearance concern him?" She moved closer, and despite his bluster, Bjorn took a step back. There was something in her bearing now, a dignity that commanded respect, even from those who wanted to dismiss her. "I am large," she said simply. "I am plain by your standards. I come from distant lands with different customs. These things are true, but I am also skilled at healing, willing to help my neighbors, and committed to building something good in this place. Which of these qualities troubles you most?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the edges of the crowd, some people began to shift uncomfortably. Bjorn's complaints were starting to sound petty when laid out so plainly. "You should have stayed where you belonged," he muttered, but the fire had gone out of his argument. "And where do I belong?" Brynhild asked gently. "With people who judge worth by appearance alone? Who turn away strangers in need? Who mock what they don't understand?" She shook her head. "I think not. I belong with people who value kindness, who appreciate useful skills, who understand that strength comes in many forms." She turned to address the crowd directly. "I know some of you have doubts about me. That's natural. I'm new here, different from what you're accustomed to. But I ask you to judge me by my actions, not my appearance. Let my work speak for my character." "Your work has already spoken," called out Gudrun. "My son is alive because of your skill, and my husband's back." "Pain is gone for the first time in months," added another woman. "She mended my daughter's favorite dress when I couldn't make the stitches hold," offered a third voice. One by one, testimonies emerged from the crowd. Small kindnesses, helpful remedies, quiet competence that had been noticed and appreciated. The tide of opinion was shifting, and Bjorn found himself increasingly isolated in his hostility. Varg stepped forward to stand beside his wife, his presence both protective and supportive. "Any man who speaks against Brynhild speaks against me," he said firmly, "and any who question her place in this village question my judgment as well." The Implicit threat was clear. Varg Stoneskin's judgment had been proven countless times in battle and in peace. Challenging it directly would require more courage than Bjorn possessed, especially when that challenge was based on nothing more than prejudice and wounded pride. "This isn't finished," Bjorn muttered, but he was already backing away from the confrontation. "No," Brynhild agreed calmly. "It isn't. But each day I prove my worth here. Each person I help, each kindness I show. These things build something stronger than words can tear down. You're welcome to test yourself against that foundation whenever you choose." As the crowd dispersed, Brynhild felt a warm hand slip into each of hers. Astrid and Ingrid flanked her, their young faces proud and protective. "That was well done," Astrid said quietly. "Mother would have approved." It was the first time the girl had spoken of Sigrid without pain, shadowing her words, and Brynhild treasured the gift of that simple acceptance. The first snowfall arrived early that year, blanketing Ravensfjord in pristine white that transformed the harsh landscape into something almost magical. Brynhild stood at the longhouse door, watching fat flakes drift down from a pewter sky, and felt the weight of approaching winter settle on her shoulders like a familiar cloak. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, but she could sense the undercurrents of tension that had been building despite their recent victory over Bjorn's public challenge. Varg had grown increasingly quiet over the past few days, spending long hours staring into the flames with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something was troubling him, something deeper than village politics or seasonal preparations. She found him that evening in the alcove, where he kept his weapons and armor, carefully oiling the blade of his battle-axe. The weapon was magnificent, double-headed steel with intricate runes carved along the handle, the kind of heirloom that passed from father to son through generations of warriors. In the firelight, the metal seemed to pulse with its own inner life. "That's beautiful work," she said softly, settling beside him on the wooden bench. "The craftsmanship is exceptional." "My father's axe," Varg replied without looking up from his task. "And his father's before him. 5 generations of Stoneskin blood have blessed this blade." His voice carried a weight that went beyond simple pride in family heritage. "It's seen many battles," Brynhild observed, noting the careful way he handled the weapon, the reverence in his movements. "Too many." He set down the oiling cloth and finally met her eyes. "That's what troubles me, Brynhild. This axe expects to taste blood again, to sing in battle, to prove the worth of the man who wields it. But I'm no longer certain I want to give it what it craves." The admission surprised her. In the weeks since their marriage, she'd seen many sides of Varg, the grieving widower, the protective father, the respected leader, but never this introspective warrior questioning his own nature. "What changed?" she asked gently. Varg was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, as if each one required careful consideration. "You did," he said simply. "Watching you heal Thorstein, seeing you face down Bjorn with nothing but wisdom and courage, observing how you've brought peace to this house without raising your voice or demanding obedience. It's made me question what strength really means." He stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the snow-covered village. "I've spent my life believing that might makes right, that the strongest warrior deserves the greatest respect. But you've accomplished more with kindness in 3 weeks than I managed with force in 3 years of raiding." Brynhild felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. Not just gratitude for his words, but something deeper, warmer. She'd married this man expecting nothing more than shelter and security. She hadn't expected to find herself genuinely caring about his inner struggles. "Different situations require different kinds of strength," she said carefully. "A warrior's courage serves its purpose in times of war. A healer's patience serves its purpose in times of peace. Neither is more valuable than the other. But which am I supposed to be now?" The question carried years of accumulated doubt. The other men still see me as Varg the Raider, Varg Stoneskin who brought terror to Saxon shores. They expect me to lead them on profitable expeditions, to maintain our reputation through force of arms. But every time I consider it, I think of you and the girls, of the life we're building here." He turned back to face her, and she saw vulnerability in his pale eyes that took her breath away. This legendary warrior, this man who'd claimed her, so boldly in front of the entire village, was asking for her guidance, her opinion on choices that would shape their future. "What do you want?" she asked. "Not what others expect, not what tradition demands. What does Varg Stoneskin want for his life?" The question seemed to surprise him. Perhaps no one had ever asked him that before, or perhaps he'd never allowed himself to consider it seriously. "I want to watch my daughters grow into strong women," he said slowly. "I want to see them married to good men who'll treat them with respect. I want to build something lasting here, something more meaningful than a reputation for violence." He paused, then added more quietly, "I want to be worthy of the woman who sees strength where others see only size, who brings healing where others bring only conflict." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Their marriage had been a practical arrangement, a solution to mutual needs. But something else was growing in the spaces between necessity and choice, something that felt both precious and fragile. "Then perhaps," Brynhild said gently, "it's time to hang up the axe and pick up different tools. The village needs leadership, but not the kind that comes from the edge of a blade. They need someone who can help them prepare for harsh winters, settle disputes fairly, guide them toward prosperity rather than mere survival. You think I could be that kind of leader?" "I think you already are," she replied with conviction. "You protected me when no one else would. You've raised 2 strong daughters despite your own grief. You've earned respect through character as much as through combat. Those are the qualities of a leader worth following." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending snow swirling past the windows. Winter was coming in earnest now, and with it would come the long months when the village would need every ounce of wisdom and cooperation to survive. "There will be pressure," Varg warned. "Some of the younger men are eager for raiding season. They see peaceful seasons as lost opportunities, missed chances for wealth and glory. And there will always be those who mistake aggression for strength." Brynhild agreed. "But true leaders don't follow the crowd. They show the way forward, even when that path is difficult or unpopular." That night, as they lay in their separate sleeping furs, still too new to this marriage for true intimacy, Brynhild listened to the steady rhythm of Varg's breathing and felt the weight of responsibility settling around her like a second skin. She'd come here seeking nothing more than acceptance and shelter. Instead, she found herself helping to shape the future of a man whose choices would affect not just their family, but the entire village. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who had been rejected for being too large, too different, too much, was now being asked to help guide decisions that required exactly those qualities. The breadth of vision that came from being an outsider, the strength to stand firm when others wavered, the willingness to take up space when space was needed. Perhaps, she thought, as sleep began to claim her, she'd finally found a place where being too much was exactly enough. The revelation came on a bitter morning in late autumn, delivered by a travel-worn messenger who arrived at dawn, with frost in his beard and urgency in his eyes. Brynhild was kneading bread when the man stumbled through their door, his legs barely able to carry him after what must have been days of hard riding. "Varg Stoneskin," he gasped, accepting the cup of warm ale Brynhild pressed into his trembling hands. "I bring word from Jarl Magnus of Trondheim. You must come quickly. There's been a discovery." Varg emerged from the sleeping alcove, already reaching for his weapons out of long habit. "What kind of discovery requires such urgency?" The messenger gulped the ale gratefully before answering. "Your brother, my lord, Gunnar Stoneskin, lives." The cup slipped from Brynhild's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the stone floor with a sound like breaking worlds. Varg went completely still, his face draining of all color as the impossible words echoed in the sudden silence. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Gunnar died 5 years ago. I saw his ship burn, saw it sink beneath the waves. No man could have survived that storm. Yet he lives," the messenger insisted, "badly injured, scarred, but alive. He's been recovering in a monastery on the Orkney Islands, cared for by monks who pulled him from the sea more dead than alive. He only recently regained enough strength to send word of his survival." From behind the tapestry came the sound of hurried footsteps as Astrid and Ingrid emerged, their young faces bright with excitement at this miraculous news. To them, Uncle Gunnar had been a figure of legend, their father's younger brother, the charming rogue who brought them exotic gifts from distant lands and told tales of adventure that made their eyes shine with wonder. "Uncle Gunnar is alive," Ingrid breathed, clapping her hands together. "When will he come home? Will he bring presents like he used to?" But Brynhild was watching Varg's face, and what she saw there sent ice through her veins. This wasn't the joy of a man learning his beloved brother had cheated death. This was the expression of someone whose worst fears had just taken flesh and walked back into his life. "What does he want?" Varg asked quietly, his voice carefully controlled. The messenger shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "He asks that you come to him, my lord. Says he has much to discuss that cannot be trusted to messages. The Jarl has already prepared a ship for your journey." "Of course he has," Varg muttered, but so quietly only Brynhild could hear. Louder, he said, "How long do I have to consider this request?" "The ship departs with tomorrow's tide, my lord." The Jarl was most insistent about the urgency. After the messenger had been fed and given a place to rest, Varg retreated to the alcove, where he kept his battle-axe, sitting in brooding silence, while Brynhild cleaned up the broken pottery and tried to make sense of what she'd witnessed. Something was deeply wrong with this situation, but she couldn't yet grasp what it was. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, she found him still sitting with the weapon across his knees, staring into the fire with haunted eyes. "Tell me about Gunnar," she said softly, settling beside him. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, reluctantly, like blood from a deep wound. "Gunnar was everything I wasn't," he began. "Handsome where I was scarred, charming where I was gruff, silver-tongued where I spoke only when necessary. Women loved him, men wanted to follow him, and he moved through the world as if it existed solely for his pleasure. There was pain in his voice, but also something else, something that sounded almost like guilt. He was also reckless, ambitious, and utterly without conscience when it came to getting what he wanted. The raid where he supposedly died, he'd planned it against my advice, convinced he could strike a wealthy monastery and escape before their defenders could respond. I tried to talk him out of it, but Gunnar never listened to caution. What happened?" Varg's hands tightened on the axe handle. "The raid went wrong from the beginning. The monastery was better defended than expected, the weather turned savage, and Gunnar's ship was separated from the fleet in the chaos. When the storm hit, I had to choose between following him into certain death or leading the survivors home safely. You chose your men. I chose my men," he confirmed heavily. "And I've lived with that choice every day since. Part of me has always wondered if I could have saved him, if I'd been willing to risk everything." But Brynhild sensed there was more. To the story, deeper currents that Varg hadn't yet revealed. "What aren't you telling me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally continued, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Gunnar was in love with Sigrid before I married her. Had been courting her for months, bringing her gifts, composing poetry in her honor. She was fond of him, charmed by his attention. Everyone expected them to marry. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. But she chose you instead. She chose stability over passion, responsibility over romance. Gunnar never forgave me for that, never accepted that she might genuinely prefer my steadiness to his brilliance. He convinced himself I'd somehow stolen her through trickery or manipulation, and now he's alive, and you're married to someone else. Varg nodded grimly. Someone he'll see as a replacement for what he lost, a symbol of how completely I've moved. On from the woman he believed should have been his. Gunnar doesn't forgive easily, and he certainly doesn't forget. The implications were staggering. If Gunnar truly blamed Varg for Sigrid's choice, if he'd spent 5 years nurturing that resentment while recovering from his injuries, his return could tear apart everything they'd built. Worse, if he had the Jarl's backing, he might have the power to challenge Varg's position, his property, even his right to his current marriage. "What will you do?" Brynhild asked. "I have to go," Varg said heavily. "If I refuse the Jarl's summons, it will look like cowardice or guilt. Gunnar would use that against me, paint me as a man who abandoned his brother, and now lacks the courage to face the consequences. And if you go, then I face whatever accusation he's prepared, whatever price he demands for his forgiveness." He turned to look at her directly. "Brynhild, you need to understand. If Gunnar has convinced the Jarl that I wronged him, that I abandoned him deliberately, he might demand compensation. He might claim rights to this household, to my property, even to your wife," she finished quietly. The words hung between them like a blade. In Norse law, if a man could prove he'd been gravely wronged by his brother, he might claim restitution that included property, wealth, and in extreme cases, even family members. It was an ancient right, rarely invoked, but still legally binding. "I won't let that happen," Varg said fiercely. "Whatever he demands, whatever price he asks, I'll find another way to satisfy it." But Brynhild could see the fear in his eyes, the terrible uncertainty of a man who'd thought his past was buried, only to have it rise again like a draugr seeking vengeance. She reached out and covered his hands with hers, feeling the tremor he was trying so hard to hide. "Then we face it together," she said simply. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Outside, the wind howled around the longhouse like the voices of the restless dead, and Brynhild couldn't shake the feeling that their hard-won peace was about to be shattered by ghosts that refused to stay buried. The night before Varg's departure passed in restless preparation and whispered conferences. Neither he nor Brynhild slept well, both haunted by possibilities too dark to voice but too real to ignore. As dawn approached, bringing with it the tide that would carry him away, they found themselves sitting beside the dying fire, hands clasped in the flickering darkness. "I should come with you," Brynhild said for the 3rd time, though they both knew it was impossible. A wife's presence at such a meeting would be seen as either weakness on Varg's part or presumption on hers. "The girls need you here," Varg replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "And I need to know they're safe, that you're safe. Whatever Gunnar has planned, he'll find it harder to execute if his primary targets aren't conveniently gathered in one place." The practical wisdom of his words didn't make the separation any easier. In the weeks since their marriage, they'd grown closer than either had expected, their partnership deepening from convenience into something approaching genuine affection. The thought of losing that, of having it stolen away by ancient grievances and legal technicalities, made her chest tight with fear. "What if he demands trial by combat?" she asked quietly. "You're older now, carrying old wounds. He's had 5 years to heal, to prepare." Varg's smile was grim but determined. "Then I'll remind him why our father named me Stoneskin and gave him nothing but pretty words. Some things don't change with age, Brynhild. The heart of a warrior is one of them." But she could see the doubt in his eyes, the uncertainty of a man who'd been questioning his violent nature, only to have circumstances force him back toward the blade. The irony was cruel. Just as he'd begun to envision a different kind of life, the past was demanding he prove himself in the old ways once more. As the sun rose, painting the fjord in shades of gold and copper, the entire village turned, out to see Varg off. The ship that awaited him was sleek and fast, built for speed rather than cargo, its dragon prow carved with intricate details that spoke of wealth and power. This was no mere transport. It was a statement, a reminder of the forces arrayed against him. Astrid and Ingrid clung to their father with desperate intensity, their earlier excitement about Uncle Gunnar's return now tempered by adult awareness of the stakes involved. They'd grown up enough in recent weeks to understand that their family's stability hung in the balance. "Bring Uncle Gunnar home safely," Ingrid whispered against Varg's chest, "but bring yourself home first. And don't let him charm you into doing something stupid," Astrid added with the sharp insight of a girl becoming a woman. "Mother always said he could talk his way around anyone, even you." Varg's farewell to Brynhild was necessarily brief and public, but she felt the weight of everything unsaid in the pressure of his hands, the intensity of his gaze. "Keep them safe," he murmured. "And if something goes wrong, if word comes that I won't be returning, take the girls and go south. Magnus Eriksson will help you find safe passage." "Nothing will go wrong," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "You'll return to us whole and victorious, and we'll face whatever comes. Next together." But as the ship disappeared around the bend of the fjord, carrying her husband toward an uncertain fate, Brynhild felt the cold weight of premonition settling in her bones. The village seemed smaller with his protective presence gone, more vulnerable to the winds of change that were already beginning to blow. Those winds manifested sooner than expected. By midday, riders were arriving from neighboring settlements, men who'd heard rumors of Gunnar's return and come to assess the situation for themselves. Some claimed to be old friends. Others admitted openly they were here to see which way the wind would blow before choosing sides. The most troubling visitor was Olaf the Far-Travelled, a grey-bearded warrior whose reputation for political maneuvering was matched only by his skill with a blade. He arrived with a small retinue of younger men, all armed and alert, their presence a clear reminder that force backed whatever diplomatic mission he claimed to be pursuing. "Where are my old friend's daughters?" he asked jovially, though his eyes remained cold as winter seas. "I would speak with them about their uncle's miraculous return." Brynhild had anticipated this, had prepared the girls for exactly this scenario. "They're visiting friends in the village," she replied calmly. "Children need normal activities, especially during times of uncertainty." "Ah, but these aren't normal times," Olaf countered, settling uninvited at their table and gesturing for his men to make themselves comfortable. "These are times when family bonds matter most, when old alliances must be honored and new arrangements evaluated." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. He was here to assess the stability of Varg's household, to determine whether Brynhild represented strength or weakness in the coming conflict. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, would be reported back to interested parties. "I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning," she said pleasantly, setting out ale and bread with the mechanical courtesy due to guests, regardless of their intentions. "My husband has gone to greet his brother joyfully. What arrangements need?" "Evaluation." Olaf's smile was sharp as a blade. "Come now, woman, we both know the situation is more complex than that. Gunnar Stoneskin was wronged, abandoned by his brother in his hour of greatest need. Now he returns to find his place usurped, his brother married to a foreign woman of questionable virtue." "Questionable virtue?" Brynhild's voice remained level, but ice crept into her tone. "Please elaborate on this concern. A woman who arrives alone, unmarried, desperate enough to accept any man who'll have her. Such a woman might make promises she can't keep, claim abilities she doesn't possess. Some might wonder if she's truly worthy of the Stoneskin name. It was a clever attack, designed to undermine her confidence while gathering intelligence about her character and capabilities. Olaf wanted to see how she'd respond to direct challenge, whether she'd crumble under pressure or fight back. "I see," Brynhild said thoughtfully, then began moving around the longhouse with deliberate purpose. From her herb stores, she selected several samples, setting them on the table where Olaf could see them clearly. Perhaps you'd like to test my abilities personally. This is wolfsbane, deadly in large doses, but useful for treating certain ailments in tiny amounts. And this is foxglove. It can stop a heart or restart one, depending on the dosage and application. She met his eyes directly. Or perhaps you'd prefer to discuss my other skills. I can read and write in 3 languages, calculate grain stores. For long winters, negotiate fair prices with traders, and command respect from those who value substance over appearance. Tell me, Olaf far-travelled, which of these abilities troubles you most? The challenge was clear, and his men shifted uncomfortably as they recognized the steel beneath her calm exterior. This wasn't the frightened, desperate woman they'd expected. To find interesting, Olaf murmured, his assessment of her clearly shifting. Very interesting indeed. That evening, after the unwelcome guests had departed to spread word of their findings, Brynhild sat with Astrid and Ingrid around the fire, teaching them to prepare defensive herbs while discussing the realities they faced. Father might not. A win, Astrid said quietly, her 14-year-old pragmatism cutting through comfortable illusions. Uncle Gunnar was always smarter, always more convincing. If he's had 5 years to plan his revenge, then we prepare for every possibility, Brynhild replied calmly. Your father is stronger than you know, wiser than he believes, and more honorable than his brother ever was. But if the worst happens, we must be ready to protect ourselves and what matters most. Which is what? Ingrid asked. Each other, Brynhild said simply. Family isn't just blood, it's choice, commitment. The willingness to stand together when standing apart would be easier. Whatever comes, we stand together. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind carried the taste of snow. Winter was coming early and hard, and with it would come challenges that would test every bond they'd worked so carefully to forge. But in the warm circle of firelight, surrounded by the scent of healing herbs and the quiet strength of the girls, who'd become her daughters in all but blood, Brynhild felt something she'd never experienced before. The fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her cubs. Let Gunnar come with his grievances and his legal claims. Let him bring allies and accusations and the weight of ancient law. He would find that the woman he sought to displace had roots deeper than he imagined and claws sharper than he'd prepared for. The battle for this family's future was far from over, and Brynhild intended to be the one left standing when the dust settled. The confrontation came at dawn, on the 3rd day after Varg's departure, announced by the thunder of hoofbeats and the glint of steel in the early light. Brynhild had been expecting it. The careful probing of the previous days had been merely preparation for this moment, when her enemies would reveal their true intentions. She stood in the doorway of the longhouse, Astrid and Ingrid flanking her, with the determined expressions of young women who'd grown up faster than they should have needed to. Behind them, the fire burned steady and warm, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with anticipation. Gunnar Stoneskin rode at the head of a column of 20 armed men, and Brynhild's first sight of him explained much about the hold he'd once had over hearts and minds, even scarred by his ordeal, a jagged line running from temple to jaw, his left hand twisted into a permanent claw. He retained the kind of magnetic presence that drew eyes and commanded attention. Where Varg was solid and dependable, Gunnar was quicksilver and flame. But it was the man riding beside him that made Brynhild's blood run cold. Varg sat his horse with the rigid posture of a man under guard rather than escort, his hands bound before him, his face a mask of controlled fury. Alive, but clearly a prisoner. Well, well, Gunnar called out as he dismounted with theatrical flourish. So this is the creature my brother chose to replace beloved Sigrid. I confess myself disappointed by his standards. His voice carried the same charm Varg had described, but underneath lay something rotten, something that spoke of years spent nursing grievances until they'd curdled into poison. This was a man who'd had too much time to think, too much time to plan, too much pain to process, without the healing influence of forgiveness. Uncle Gunnar, Astrid said coldly, showing none of the joy she'd displayed at news of his survival. You're not welcome here. Not welcome, Gunnar laughed, the sound bright and bitter. In my own family's hall? Dear niece, I think you misunderstand the situation. I've come to reclaim what was stolen from me, to set right the wrongs that have festered too long. He gestured toward Varg with mocking concern. Your father stands accused of abandonment, of choosing his own safety over his brother's life. The Jarl has heard my testimony, examined the evidence, and rendered judgment. As restitution for his crime, I claim rights to his property, his wealth, and his eyes fixed on Brynhild with predatory interest. His woman. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock and fear through the small crowd that had gathered to witness this confrontation. But Brynhild felt something else rising in her chest, not fear, but a cold, clean rage that burned away everything except absolute clarity. I am no man's property to be claimed, she said, quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. And I recognize no authority that treats women as prizes to be won or lost. Gunnar's smile sharpened. Ah, but you're wrong, my dear. Under Norse law, when a man's crimes cause loss and suffering, restitution must be made. My brother's cowardice cost me everything. My ship, my men, my chance at glory, 5 years of agony in foreign lands, 5 years of recovery from wounds that should have killed me. The debt must be paid. Then let Varg answer for himself, Brynhild replied. Face him in fair combat if you believe justice demands it, but leave his family out of your grievances. Family? Gunnar's laugh was genuine this time, delighted by her naivety. This is no family, this is a convenience, a transaction. My brother married you because you were available and grateful, nothing more. Don't pretend there's love where there's only mutual need. The accusation hit closer to home than Brynhild wanted to admit. Their marriage had indeed begun as a practical arrangement, a solution to mutual problems. But what had grown between them since? The respect, the trust, the growing affection that was real, regardless of how it had started. You speak of things you don't understand, she said firmly. Whatever arrangement brought us together, what we've built since is our own, built on lies and stolen chances, Gunnar countered. But no matter, you'll have opportunity to appreciate a better class of man soon enough. He nodded to his men, who began advancing with casual confidence. This was meant to be simple. Overwhelm any resistance, claim the prize, establish the new order. They expected the fear and submission that usually greeted superior force. They didn't expect Brynhild to step forward rather than back, or for her voice to ring out with absolute authority. Stop! The single word carried such command that even hardened warriors hesitated. Before you take another step, know that this woman is not defenseless, this house is not unprotected, and this family is not broken. From within the longhouse came the sound of movement, not the panicked scurrying of servants, but the deliberate rustle of people taking positions. Astrid and Ingrid moved to flank their stepmother, their young faces set with determination that spoke of careful preparation. Did you think we'd simply wait helplessly for your return? Brynhild asked, her tone almost conversational. Did you imagine that Varg Stoneskin would leave his family undefended, or that the woman he chose would prove so easily cowed? She reached into her herb pouch and withdrew a small vial filled with dark powder. This is nightshade extract, concentrated. Enough to kill a dozen men if properly dispersed. And I have more. Wolf's bane, foxglove, hemlock, enough to turn any feast into a funeral. The advancing men slowed, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Chemical warfare was not something they'd prepared for, and the calm certainty in her voice suggested she was entirely capable of following through on implied threats. Gunnar's expression shifted from confident amusement to wary calculation as he reassessed the situation. Around him, his men exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that what they'd expected to be a simple seizure of property had become something far more dangerous. Poison? He said, his voice carefully neutral. How uncivilized. But then, I suppose we shouldn't expect better from foreign barbarians. Barbarians? Brynhild's smile was sharp as winter ice. You mistake practical knowledge for savagery. A healer must understand both life and death, must know which plants cure and which kill. The wise woman uses whatever tools serve her purpose. From behind her came a subtle sound, the whisper of steel leaving leather. Astrid had drawn a long hunting knife, holding it with the competence of a girl who'd spent years learning from her warrior father. Beside her, Ingrid clutched a heavy iron poker from the fire, her young face set with grim determination. 3 against 20, Gunnar observed. Poor odds, even with your poisonous tricks. 3 that you can see, Brynhild corrected calmly. But did you count the villagers who've gathered to watch this spectacle? The mothers whose children I've healed, the men whose injuries I've tended, the families who've come to rely on my skills over these past weeks. Indeed, a crowd had assembled around the confrontation, and their faces showed none of the neutrality Gunnar had expected. These people had witnessed Brynhild's kindness, her competence, her quiet strength. More importantly, they'd seen how she'd brought peace and healing to their community. And did you consider, she continued, what would happen to this village's only healer if I were taken away? Who would tend the sick children when winter fevers strike? Who would deliver the difficult births, set the broken bones, ease the suffering? Of the dying? Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people began to grasp the implications. Gunnar had focused so intently on his legal rights that he'd failed to consider the practical consequences of his demands. Taking Brynhild would leave the entire community vulnerable, and desperate people made dangerous enemies. But it was Varg's voice that cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Enough. He'd somehow worked his bound hands free and now sat straighter in his saddle, every inch the legendary warrior, despite his captivity. Gunnar, you want justice? Then face me properly. Single combat, here and now, with witnesses to ensure fair terms. Gunnar turned toward his brother, his scarred face twisting into something that might have been a smile. Still trying to solve everything with violence, brother? Some things never change. Some things do, Varg replied evenly. I've learned there are many kinds of strength, many ways to protect what matters. But I've also learned that some enemies only understand the old ways. He swung down from his horse with fluid grace, his presence immediately dominating the space around him. Even weaponless and outnumbered, he radiated the kind of controlled danger that made smart men step carefully. Here are my terms, he announced clearly. Single combat between brothers, to the death or submission. If I lose, you take everything I own, my property, my wealth, my position in this community. But my wife and daughters go free, untouched, and unmolested. And if you win, Gunnar asked, though his tone suggested he considered the possibility remote, you leave this place forever. No claims, no demands, no further contact with my family. The dead stay dead, and the living get on with their lives. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that history was being made. This was the stuff of sagas, the kind of confrontation that would be retold around fires for generations. 2 brothers, separated by death and reunited by chance, settling old debts in the ancient way. I accept, Gunnar said, his voice ringing with confidence, but I choose weapons, sword and shield, as befits men of noble blood. One of his followers stepped forward with 2 matched blades and leather-bound shields, the metal gleaming in the strengthening sunlight. Both brothers accepted their weapons with the easy familiarity of men born to war, though Brynhild noticed that Varg's left shoulder seemed stiff, that old wound limiting his movement. Wait, she called out, stepping between the brothers before. Either could take position. There's something that must be said before blood is shed. Both men turned toward her, Gunnar with irritation, Varg with concern. This isn't just about old grievances or legal claims, she said, her voice carrying to every ear. This is about what kind of men you choose to be, what kind of legacy you leave behind. Gunnar, you've spent 5 years nursing hatred and planning. Revenge? Is that truly how you want to be remembered? Save your speeches for someone who cares about your opinion, Gunnar snarled. And you? She turned to Varg, her eyes holding his steadily. You've spent months learning to be more than just a warrior. Don't let his bitterness drag you back into that darkness. Some battles can't be avoided, Varg replied gently. Sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to risk losing it. She nodded, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't just about legal claims or family honor. This was about the right to choose their own future, free from the poison of old wounds and ancient grudges. Then fight well, my husband, she said quietly, and come back to us. The circle formed, the weapons were raised, and two brothers prepared to settle their differences in the way their ancestors had done for countless generations before them. The combat was brutal and brief, ending not with the clash of steel, but with the quiet wisdom of age, triumphing over the reckless fury of wounded pride. Gunnar fought like a man possessed, his blade singing through the air with deadly precision. But 5 years of recovery had left him stronger in will than in body. His scarred hand couldn't grip the sword properly, his twisted fingers betraying him at the crucial moment when Varg's measured defense turned into devastating offense. When it ended, Gunnar lay in the dirt with Varg's blade at his throat, his chest heaving with exhaustion and something that might have been relief. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if the legendary Varg Stoneskin would claim his brother's life as the terms of combat allowed. Yield, Varg said quietly, his voice carrying none of the triumph one might expect from victory. You've lost, brother. Don't make me take what we both know I could claim. For a long moment, Gunnar stared up at the man who'd defeated him, his pale eyes searching for something he'd perhaps been hoping to find all along. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with more than just physical exhaustion. You could have killed me 5 years ago, he said slowly. Could have followed me into that storm and died beside me like a proper brother should. But you chose to live instead, chose your men over your blood. I chose responsibility over glory, Varg corrected gently. Just as I'm choosing mercy over vengeance now. Gunnar's laugh was bitter but no longer poisonous. And she taught you that, didn't she? Your foreign bride with her healing hands and her practical wisdom. She's made you soft, brother. She's made me better, Varg replied without hesitation. Strong enough to win, wise enough to know when not to use that strength. He stepped back and lowered his blade, offering his free hand to help Gunnar rise. After a moment's hesitation, his brother accepted the gesture, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet with a grimace of pain. The terms stand, Varg announced to the crowd. Gunnar Stoneskin leaves this place and makes no further claim on my household or property. In return, he keeps his life and his freedom to find his own path forward. But Brynhild stepped forward. Before anyone could respond, her herb pouch in her hands and determination in her eyes. Not yet, she said firmly. There's something that needs to be done first. She approached Gunnar carefully, studying his scarred face and twisted hand with the clinical assessment of a skilled healer. 5 years of pain? She murmured almost to herself. 5 years of letting wounds fester instead of healing properly. Don't touch me, Gunnar snarled, but there was less venom in it than exhaustion. I'm not offering to heal your body, Brynhild replied calmly. Those scars are yours to keep. But there's another kind of wound that's been poisoning you, and it's time to clean it out before it kills what's left of your soul. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered faces. This man has nursed grievances for 5 years, let them grow until they consumed everything good in him. But grievances need truth to survive, and the truth is that Varg Stoneskin made the only choice an honorable leader could make. He saved the lives of men who trusted him, rather than throwing them away on a doomed rescue. You weren't there, Gunnar protested. You don't know. I know what it means to be abandoned. Brynhild cut him off sharply. I know what it feels, like to be rejected, cast aside, told you're not good enough. But I also know the difference between being wronged and being disappointed. Varg didn't betray you, Gunnar. He just didn't love you more than his duty to others. The words hit there. Target with surgical precision. Gunnar's face went through a series of expressions: anger, denial, and finally a kind of broken understanding. Sigrid chose him, he whispered, the admission torn from some deep place he'd kept locked away. I offered her everything: adventure, passion, freedom, and she chose his steady hearth over my bright flame. And you've spent 5 years trying to prove she was wrong, Brynhild said gently. But some choices can't be undone. Some losses can't be reclaimed. The only question is whether you'll spend the rest of your life poisoning yourself with might-have-beens. She reached into her pouch and withdrew a small bundle of dried herbs. Not poison this time, but something altogether different. This is for peaceful sleep, for dreams untroubled by old pain. Take it when the memories become too sharp to bear, but more importantly, take this advice. Find something new to love instead of something old to hate. Gunnar stared at the offered herbs for a long moment, then slowly extended his good hand to accept them. Why? He asked simply. Because healing is what I do, Brynhild replied, and because you're part of this family, whether you choose to be or not. That's not something I can fix, but it's something I can honor. The departure was quiet and dignified. Gunnar gathered his men, mounted his horse, and prepared to ride away from the only family he had left in the world. But before he spurred his mount forward, he turned back one final time. Take care of them, he said to Brynhild, and there was no mockery in his voice now, only weary sincerity. They deserve better than what I could have given them. They deserve what I can give them, she replied. And that's enough. As the riders disappeared into the morning mist, Varg came to stand beside his wife, his arms settling around her shoulders with natural ease. Around them, the village began to disperse, the crisis past and normal life ready to resume. Is it finished? Astrid asked, moving to join her parents with Ingrid close behind. It's finished, Varg confirmed, pulling both girls into a fierce embrace. We're safe, we're together, and we're home. Later that evening, as they sat around their fire with the girls telling and retelling the story of the day's events, Brynhild reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived in Ravensfjord as a rejected bride, desperate and alone. She was ending this chapter as a wife, mother, and valued member of a community that had learned to see her worth. "What are you thinking about?" Varg asked quietly, noticing her contemplative mood. "About being perfect," she replied with a small smile. "You called me perfect that first day, and I thought you were either lying or mad. But maybe perfect isn't about being flawless. Maybe it's about being exactly what's needed when it's needed most." "You were exactly what we needed," he agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "All of us. The girls, the village, even Gunnar in his way. You brought healing where there was only pain." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. But inside their longhouse, warmth reigned supreme. They'd weathered the storm of the past, faced down the ghosts that threatened their future, and emerged stronger for the struggle. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them together, as a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, commitment, and the transformative power of love that sees beauty where others see only size, strength where others see only difference. In the end, Brynhild had found something more precious than acceptance. She'd found her place in the world, and more importantly, she'd made that place better for her presence. That, perhaps, was the truest definition of perfect after all.